The town of Ridgeway looked like the perfect slice of suburban life: clean streets, well-manicured lawns, and a high school that seemed welcoming at first glance. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken hierarchy. The privileged kids ruled, and the ones who didn't fit in learned to keep their heads down. Ridgeway High was no different. To outsiders, it was just another school with the usual cliques, but for those who lived it daily, there was a clear divide. Some students walked the halls with an air of entitlement, knowing that their parents' wealth and influence made them untouchable. Others, the ones who came from working-class families or stood out too much, became easy prey. Jamal Carter had no idea what he was walking into when he stepped onto campus that Monday morning. To him, it was just another school, another place he had to endure until graduation. What he didn't know was that Ridgeway had its own rules, and he was about to break every single one. Jamal was 17, but life had already tested him in ways most kids his age couldn't imagine. Growing up in military housing and rough neighborhoods had taught him how to adapt, how to read people, and most importantly, how to defend himself. His father, a Marine, had made sure of that. Before he passed away, he had trained Jamal in hand-to-hand combat, drilling discipline and resilience into him. He wasn't just physically strong, he was mentally sharp. His mother, a nurse who worked long shifts, had raised him to be independent, and he carried himself with a quiet strength that made people take notice. But Jamal didn't like attention. He wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. His plan was simple: keep his head down, get through the school year, and not make waves. Unfortunately, Ridgeway High had a way of pulling people into its unspoken war. And Jamal? He was about to find out that staying invisible wasn't an option. At the top of Ridgeway's social food chain was Chad Whitmore. The son of a powerful businessman, Chad moves through the school with unchecked arrogance. He wasn't just rich, he was entitled, and he made sure everyone knew it. With him were Jake and Tyler, his ever-loyal sidekicks. They weren't just friends, they were enforcers. Chad gave the orders, and they carried them out. Their targets were always the same: new students, kids who didn't fit the mold, or anyone too weak to fight back. Their bullying wasn't random, it was calculated. Psychological, physical, and social humiliation, it was all part of the game. And what made it worse? The teachers turned a blind eye. Chad's father donated too much money to the school for them to intervene. To Chad, Ridgeway was his kingdom. And when he saw Jamal walk in, quiet, composed, and completely unimpressed, he knew he had found his next target. Jamal's first day was exactly how he expected it to be. New school, new faces, new routines. He kept to himself, stayed focused, and ignored the unnecessary noise around him. But some things were impossible to ignore. By lunchtime, Chad had already taken an interest in him. At first, it was subtle: a few passing comments, a couple of stares. Jamal had dealt with guys like him before. He knew the type. They wanted a reaction. He refused to give them one. But then came the real test. Across the cafeteria, Chad had cornered a girl, Emily. Shy, quiet, and already a known target of his bullying. He was towering over her, smirking as he made some joke at her expense. His friends laughed. Emily shrunk in her seat. Jamal watched, assessing the situation. He didn't believe in picking fights, but he also didn't believe in standing by when someone needed help. Instead of charging in, he walked over and sat down at the same table, directly across from Chad. He didn't say a word. Didn't make a scene. Just sat there, completely unfazed. Chad looked at him, waiting for an explanation. Jamal didn't offer one. For the first time, Chad hesitated. People weren't supposed to ignore him. "Something you want to say, new kid?" Chad asked, his voice laced with amusement. Jamal took a bite of his lunch, chewed slowly, then met his gaze. "Nope," he said simply. It wasn't the words, it was the delivery. Calm. Unshaken. Like Chad wasn't worth his energy. For the first time in a long time, Chad felt something he wasn't used to. Uncertainty. And that made him angry. Jamal had no idea, but he had just broken Ridgeway's biggest unwritten rule: you don't ignore Chad Whitmore. Chad thrived on control. He needed to be feared. But Jamal's indifference? That was something he couldn't tolerate. For the rest of the day, the tension followed Jamal like a shadow. Chad wasn't done. He wouldn't be ignored. By the time the final bell rang, whispers had already started. "Did you see how he just walked away? Chad's not gonna let that slide. That new kid doesn't know what he just got himself into." Jamal wasn't looking for trouble. But sometimes, trouble finds you. And Chad Whitmore was about to make sure of it. But Chad wasn't the type to let things go. And Jamal? Well, he wasn't one to back down forever. Chad Whitmore didn't let things go. And after his failed attempt to intimidate Jamal in the cafeteria, his bruised ego demanded revenge. It started small. Jamal found his books missing from his locker. It wasn't a mystery, he caught Chad and his crew laughing down the hall as his textbooks lay scattered across the floor. He picked them up without a word. Next, it was the hallway stunts. A well-placed foot here, a shoulder bump there. Jamal wasn't the only one who suffered. Others, like Emily and a few of Chad's previous victims, endured their own daily humiliations. But the moment Chad realized Jamal wouldn't lash out, he got bolder. Whispers started circulating. New kid's too scared to fight back. He won't last. But Jamal wasn't scared. He was watching. Studying. Measuring just how much control Chad really had over the school. And what he saw. Fear. Not just from Chad's targets, but from everyone. The students, the teachers, even the principal, they all knew what was happening, but they did nothing. They were waiting to see if the new kid would break. The cafeteria was full that day, the usual lunchtime chaos in full swing. Jamal sat at a corner table, eating alone, just how he liked it. Then came the moment Chad had been waiting for. A loud splat. Something cold and wet smacked the side of Jamal's hoodie, dripping onto his tray. Laughter erupted around the room. Mashed potatoes. Jamal exhaled slowly, lifting a napkin to wipe his sleeve. Chad stood a few feet away, grinning like a wolf. "What's wrong, Carter?" he taunted. "Don't like the food? Thought I'd help you taste test." The cafeteria went silent. This was it. They were finally going to see what the new kid was really made of. Jamal's fists clenched under the table. He could hear his father's voice in his head. "Control your breathing. Control your mind. Don't let anger decide for you." He inhaled. Counted to 3. Then, calmly, he picked up his tray and walked away. No reaction. Chad's smirk faltered. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. Behind him, Emily hurried to his side. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "He's only going to keep pushing." Jamal glanced at her. "I know," he said. "Let him." Emily hesitated, then lowered her voice. "They're planning something worse." Jamal didn't ask how she knew. He just nodded. "Then I'll be ready." By the end of the week, the pranks escalated. First, they stuffed his locker with trash, forcing him to dig through food wrappers just to get his books. Jamal ignored it. Then, they got more personal. His gym clothes went missing. When he finally found them, they were shredded, the fabric barely holding together. Still, Jamal let it go. But Chad wasn't done. The setup happened during gym class. Chad, playing the role of the friendly student, walked up to Jamal during a basketball drill. "Hey, new kid, let's see what you got," Chad said, tossing him the ball. Jamal caught it, eyes weary. Then, bam! Chad suddenly lunged, crashing into Jamal and flinging himself onto the ground with an exaggerated thud. The gym went silent. Chad groaned, clutching his shoulder. "What the hell, man?" he shouted. Jamal's eyes narrowed. A setup. Teachers rushed over. Chad's sidekicks, Jake and Tyler, pointed fingers immediately. "Jamal just lost it, coach," Jake yelled. "Shoved Chad for no reason." Lies. But convincing ones. The next thing Jamal knew, he was being pulled toward the principal's office. And Chad? He just grinned. Jamal sat in the principal's office, arms crossed. Across from him, Chad played the role of the victim perfectly. His father had taught him well. "I don't know what happened," Chad said, shaking his head. "I was just trying to be nice." The principal, Mr. Reynolds, barely looked at Jamal before sighing. "Jamal," he said, "this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." Jamal's patience snapped. "I didn't do anything." Reynolds folded his hands. "That's not what the witnesses say." Jamal scoffed. "Witnesses?" Chad's friends didn't count. Then, the door opened. Mr. Whitmore, Chad's father, stepped inside, dressed in an expensive suit and reeking of power. He glanced at Chad, then at the principal. "I assume my son is free to go?" he said smoothly. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Jamal clenched his jaw. "Of course." Chad smirked at him as he walked out. But Jamal wasn't angry. He was done playing by their rules. If the system wouldn't protect him, he'd protect himself. On his terms. Chad was livid. Jamal was supposed to react. He was supposed to fight back, get suspended, and disappear. But no. He just took it. So Chad changed tactics. That weekend, whispers spread through Ridgeway. There was going to be a fight. Not just any fight, a public humiliation. Jamal versus Chad, behind the school, After hours. And everyone was going to be there. Jamal didn't agree to it. He didn't need to. It was already set. By the time Monday came, students were buzzing. New kid's finally gonna get what's coming to him. Chad's gonna make him beg. Jamal heard it all. He didn't respond. Instead, he spent his lunch break stretching, focusing, preparing. What they didn't know. Jamal wasn't walking into a fight. He was walking into a lesson. What they didn't know. Jamal wasn't walking into a fight. He was walking into a lesson. The air behind Ridgeway High crackled with anticipation. 100 students formed a loose circle, their phones already recording, their voices hushed in excitement. Chad Whitmore stood at the center, rolling his shoulders, stretching his neck. He was grinning, confident. This was his show. His home turf. Across from him, Jamal Carter stood still. Calm. Watching. Chad's grin widened. "What's wrong, new kid?" he taunted. "You finally scared?" Jamal didn't answer. He just adjusted his stance, feet firm, shoulders relaxed. Chad sneered. "Guess I'll have to wake you up." Then, he swung. A wild, sloppy punch, all power, no technique. Jamal stepped aside effortlessly. Chad stumbled forward, catching himself before falling. The crowd roared, some cheering, others jeering. "That was pathetic, Whitmore." Someone called. Chad's jaw clenched. He wasn't going to be embarrassed. Not by him. He rushed in again, fists flying. "Jamal?" He just kept moving. Dodging. Weaving. Studying. Chad didn't realize it yet, but this wasn't a fight. This was a lesson. Chad swung again. Missed. Again. And again. The crowd's cheers turned to murmurs. "What's going on? Why can't he hit him?" Chad growled, frustration boiling over. His punches got sloppier, his movements wilder. Jamal could see it. The wasted energy. The exposed openings. Chad wasn't a fighter. He was a bully. And bullies relied on fear, not skill. Jamal exhaled. Enough waiting. Chad lunged. This time, Jamal didn't dodge. He moved in. Crack. One clean, calculated counterpunch, fist meeting jaw. Chad's head snapped back. His body wobbled. Then, he dropped. Silence. No one breathed. The great Chad Whitmore lay flat on his back, blinking at the sky, completely stunned. Jamal stepped back, rolling his shoulders. "Get up," he said. But Chad didn't move. And for the first time, the school saw the truth. Chad wasn't the strongest. He wasn't even close. The silence shattered. Jake and Tyler, Chad's ever-loyal enforcers, weren't about to let their leader lose. "You little," Jake lunged first, Tyler right behind him. Jamal's expression didn't change. They were stronger than Chad, sure. But they were still predictable. Jamal ducked under Jake's first swing and drove an elbow into his gut. Jake gasped, doubling over. Tyler came next, faster, more reckless. Jamal sidestepped, grabbing Tyler's wrist mid-swing and twisting. A pop of pain, Tyler howled, dropping to his knees. Jake tried to recover, Jamal didn't let him. A sharp kick to the side of his knee, and he crumbled. Both bullies lay groaning on the pavement. Jamal? He barely looked winded. He gazed down at them, Chad still dazed, Jake and Tyler in pain. And then, he walked away. No gloating. No insults. Just 5 calm words. Pick on someone your own size. Chad didn't get up. Jake and Tyler didn't chase him. The students, those who once cheered for Chad, now stared at Jamal in stunned silence. Then, someone laughed. Not at him. At Chad. The spell had broken. Chad Whitmore wasn't a king. He was just another kid. A bully who had finally been put in his place. Phones buzzed. Videos uploaded. By morning, the whole school would know. By afternoon, the world would. Chad's reign of terror? Finished. But for Jamal? This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a change. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a change. The fight had ended, but the battle wasn't over. By the next morning, the video had spread across the school like wildfire. Every student had seen Chad Whitmore, once Ridgeway High's untouchable bully, laid out cold, with his goons defeated beside him. It didn't take long for the news to reach the adults. Chad's father, Richard Whitmore, was furious. As a wealthy businessman and a major donor to the school, he had always been able to protect his son from consequences. He stormed into the principal's office, demanding that his son be portrayed as the victim. But this time, it wasn't that easy. There were too many witnesses. Too many recordings. Too much undeniable proof of what had really happened. For the first time, Chad Whitmore couldn't bully his way out of trouble. Expulsion was inevitable. His father pulled strings, threatened lawsuits, tried everything to salvage the situation, but his influence was unraveling. Other parents, once afraid to speak against the Whitmore family, stepped forward with their own stories of how Chad had tormented their children for years. The school had no choice but to act. Not just against Chad, but against the entire culture of bullying that had been ignored for far too long. New anti-bullying policies were introduced. Teachers were instructed to take reports seriously. Students who once stayed silent now felt empowered to speak up. Ridgeway High was changing. And it all started with one fight. Jamal sat outside on the bleachers, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and purple. He had never wanted to fight. He didn't come here to be a hero. But when the moment came, he had to stand his ground. If he had stayed silent, if he had let them keep pushing him, he would have become just another victim in Chad's long list. Instead, he became something else. A symbol of resistance. A quiet force that said, "Enough is enough." "Hey!" He turned to see Emily approaching, a small smile on her face. She sat beside him, hugging her knees. "People are saying you changed everything," she said. No one's scared of him anymore. Jamal exhaled, shaking his head. "I didn't change anything. They just needed a reminder that they had a choice." She smiled. "Well, whatever you did, I'm glad you're here." She wasn't the only one. All day, students had come up to him, thanking him. Some who had been bullied. Some who had been too afraid to speak up. For the first time, Jamal felt something he hadn't felt since moving here. He felt seen. The next day at school, everything was different. Whispers of fear had turned into conversations of courage. Students who once cowered now stood taller. Jamal wasn't the new kid anymore. He was just Jamal. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. As he walked through the halls, he saw something he never expected. A younger student, one of Chad's former targets, stood up to an upperclassman who had shoved him aside. "You got a problem?" The upperclassman sneered. The kid squared his shoulders. "Yeah. I do." Jamal smiled. That was all he ever wanted. Not to be feared. Not to be a legend. Just to remind people that they could stand up for themselves. He had spent so much time thinking strength was about winning fights. But real strength? It was about knowing when to fight, and when to walk away. Strength isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when to. Ridgeway High moved on, but Chad Whitmore's legacy of terror ended the day he hit the ground. His father, once a powerful name in the community, found his influence crumbling. The scandal surrounding Chad's expulsion was too much to bury, and whispers of other misdeeds began to surface. Facing public humiliation, the Whitmore family packed up and left town. No one missed them. Without Chad's shadow looming over them, Ridgeway High became a different place. The fear he thrived on was gone, and in its place was something new: confidence, strength, unity. As for Jamal, he didn't just move on. He made sure no one else had to suffer the way he did. With the support of his teachers and peers, he started an after-school self-defense program. Not just teaching kids how to fight, but how to stand tall, how to carry themselves with confidence, how to defuse a situation before it even started. It wasn't about violence. It was about taking fear away from those who had lived under it for too long. And for the first time in his life, Jamal felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was making a difference. Bullies don't win because they're strong. They win because they make others feel weak. They thrive on fear, on silence, on people believing they have no choice but to take it. But here's the truth: take that fear away, and they have nothing. You don't have to fight to be strong. You just have to refuse to break. So stand up. Speak out. Defend yourself and those who can't. Because when you stop letting fear control you, you take away a bully's greatest weapon.